Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Madam the President. Really, it's very painful experience to me. I spent in Iraq 3 years and a half, very enduring experience. My job in Iraq as Chief of Human Rights was to promote and protect human rights. My job in Iraq as advisor to the Special Representative of Secretary General, the SRSG, is to advise him on the right path for finding a dignified way for the Ashrafis to get out of that situation. And I must admit that I think I failed in both positions because I did not protect and I did not really change much on the ground in Ashraf. But the reality is that I witnessed a lot. And I could tell you that the experience I went through, it's extremely difficult to summarize it in a few minutes. But I'll make sure that I won't be too long. First, I would like to shed some light on the UNAMI's action vis-à-vis the Ashrafis. We operated always on the presumption of guilt of these people. Everything we did at UNAMI, we presumed that they are terrorists, and we dealt with them accordingly. I did advise UNAMI that the fundamental principle in the United Nations is to presume innocence. But unfortunately, that was not the case. We worked exactly opposite and defiance to the fundamental principle of justice, which is the presumption of innocence. On that ground, we drafted a so-called Memorandum of Understanding for the relocation of the Ashrafis from Camp Ashraf to Camp Liberty. This Memorandum of Understanding is absolutely the content of a letter addressed by the ambassador of Iraq in Brussels to the member states of the EU, telling them what's the plan and what's the program for the government of Iraq to relocate these people. In this letter, he categorically tells them these are a group of dangerous terrorists, and the government will take all necessary measures to get them out of Iraq, to expel them out of Iraq. Now, again, this letter is drafted on the presumption of guilt, and the due process of law was put aside because the government of Iraq, the current government of Iraq, when you talk about the process of law, it's something completely different. Now, the draft MOU was that it's a shared responsibility between UNAMI and the government of Iraq to close Camp Ashraf. Then we sent this draft MOU to New York, to the Department of Legal Affairs, OLA. We asked for advice. We were told, this is dangerous. You are assuming UNAMI is taking responsibility. No, we don't want you to take any responsibility. We want you to simply be facilitator. So we changed the MOU accordingly. If you look at the MOU, that they actually signed MOU, 7 clauses in the MOU, they all give the responsibility to the government of Iraq. The 7th clause of the MOU is related to the work of the UNHCR. It just sort of strips the government of Iraq from its responsibility vis-à-vis the mandate of the UNHCR. It said that even though the government agrees that the UNHCR will take the refugee status determination process, the RSD, but it's not bound by it. It will not recognize the outcome of this process. Meaning, let the UN do whatever they want to do, but we have our own way of handling the situation. That said, we started preparing, after the signature of this document, we started preparing the transfer process. And we had to first make 2 assessments. And unfortunately, most of you heard about one assessment, the humanitarian assessment in Camp Liberty. But nobody ever mentioned the security assessment of Camp Liberty. So we first made the assessment, security assessment of Camp Liberty, and we found that the camp is so vulnerable. And then we started talking about how to attenuate the vulnerability of the camp. It's by making sure that we have more Fijians, soldiers. The Fijian soldiers are the ones protecting UNAMI. To protect, not the Ashrafis, to protect the UN staff. So we were reinforced. That is to attenuate security situation. But we did not do anything to protect the Ashrafis. So now we move to second assessment of Camp Liberty. Camp Liberty was assessed by a specialist brought from the UNHCR in Addis Ababa at a very high cost. And he was brought to certify whether Camp Liberty meets the international standards or not. He arrives, we met him, and he was instructed to certify. Mr. Kobler told him, "You are not here to do anything but to certify." And the man was put in a very difficult position. I was with him. I was the first with him to visit Camp Liberty. And we all agreed that this is an acceptable situation, particularly knowing very well Ashraf, and knowing that it's not a situation of refugees who are running for their life, to save their life in emergency situation. This is what the shelter expert was looking for. We have people, like now in Syria or elsewhere in Africa, when people are actually running away to seek refuge to save their life from imminent danger. That was not the case in Ashraf. The case of Ashraf was people settled peacefully for 25 years in Camp Ashraf, and then all of a sudden, for political reasons, the government decided to evict them from their homes. So we should not make a confusion between relocation and eviction. The case of Ashraf, it was an eviction. And UNAMI was very well aware of the conditions, according to the UN standards, of an eviction. An eviction has to be done according to the due process of law by a judicial process. All this did not happen, and we were aware that we are violating the fundamental principles of the United Nations. But yet, we have to be positive according to the instructions of the SRG. Positive, it means close your eyes. Don't try to sort of expose the situation, because we are here to save life. So he claims to save life. And we know that Camp Liberty is not a place to save life. And I hear in this forum, I tell you frankly, through my connections with the Iraqis, they never hide anything concerning the Ashrafis. They always told me, we will get them. It was not a secret. And it's not also a secret that documentation is there. The Council of Ministers' decision that says we will use all means, which means including the use of force, to evict them. So we followed this process, and we signed, at UNAMI, we signed the document in order to give some kind of legitimacy to an otherwise illegal operation. So this is why, because when you look closely at the MOU, what is the role of the United Nations? There is no role of the United Nations whatsoever except to give some legitimacy to what the government of Iraq, the Prime Minister's office, wants to do. So it was done. Now, when the 9th of February attack took place, I felt that I was vindicated in a sense, that I did warn not only UNAMI, I warned UNHCR, and particularly UNHCR, I warned them even after I resigned from the UN. Last summer, I went to the UNHCR and I told them there will be an attack, there will be blood, and you will be accountable for it. And all I got from them is just some smile.